from the shores of beautiful Lake Coeur d'Alene in the heart of North Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discuss their topics on our forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum. With your host and moderator, political scientist, Tony Stewart.
I want to welcome all of you to our program today, and our topic is Travels Through the British Isles in the year 1999. On this program, about 3 times a year, we try to bring you a travelogue, and our reaction from you is that that is something you enjoy very much. We also try to have some visual aids, some slides or photographs, so that you can sense what it's like for our guests wherever they have been. But before introducing today's guests, I also want to thank Doug Miles, the production manager of our program, and our crew. Today's been a long day of taping. We've done 3 programs for taping that air at a later date, and I want to recognize their hard work today. But I'm very pleased to welcome to our program our guest to deal with Travels Through the British Isles, a colleague of ours at North Idaho College, Annie McKinley. She teaches in the speech department at our institution and travels every summer. In fact, it is my understanding that she has been to Europe 10 times and will be going back again next year. So she is a great guest to have to talk about where she's been and some suggestions that one can share with others that might be going. Annie, my friend, it's a pleasure to have you on the program, and we thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
And as always, I'm very pleased to have a regular panelist, Janelle Burke, and Janelle will commence today's questioning of our trip to the British Isles.
Well, it's very interesting, of course, always to go on a trip with someone who's been there and kind of live vicariously. What do you mean by the British Isles? Where is it and what is it?
Okay, the British Isles takes in Scotland and England, and we went on into Ireland, which is not really considered a British Isles, as we were told very definitely by the Irish people when we were there. We were in Southern Ireland. Northern Ireland would still be considered the British Isles.
And what are some of the advantages to going to the British Isles as a traveler? If there are people out there who are considering some place that they'd like to go, what are some of the advantages to choosing that as the location for your trip?
The British Isles is nice because, first of all, it's easy to get around in there. And I'll talk about it later, but we opted for a rental car this time. But it's easy to get around because of the trains. They have a very excellent train system there that can take you all through. There is because of language, there's not the language barrier most of the time. There are, of course, some differences in the language. We could talk about that later. But they speak English and we speak English, so that makes it a little bit easier. I don't think they have any animosity towards Americans. I thought they were some of the friendliest people I've ever met. I guess because my last name is McKinley, and I think that the Scots, of course, are very friendly people. And so that's very easy. The money exchange is not that difficult once you figure it out, as all exchanges. They go on the pound system, and so I think it was like 1.6 pounds for every dollar.
And the accommodations are probably pretty good, aren't they?
Oh, the accommodations are very nice. And we can talk about that a little bit later too, if you'd like to. We stay in mostly bed and breakfast where we go there. I think that that's where bed and breakfast kind of like originated. When you think of bed and breakfast, we think of maybe a bed and breakfast here in Coeur d'Alene, and we think of the beautiful Victorian homes and stuff. And the bed and breakfast over there are like that. The only difference is that a lot of times it'll be just one room in someone's home. We found a delightful one up that we were in the top of Scotland, and we were just driving around, and this little home said bed and breakfast, so we stopped in, and it was just a lady who just rents out a room for 2 months out of the year, and she was just very fun. And so we enjoy it because a lot of times there's only about 3 rooms to a home, and the accommodations too, I'll put a plug in for Rick Steves. We follow Rick Steves' suggestions a lot. I know Rick Steves does a show for public television, and in fact, he makes a lot of suggestions. He actually goes there. We followed every place we went. It was kind of like they'd say, "Oh, Rick Steves was just here. Rick Steves was just here." So he actually goes there and sees a lot of the place. So the accommodations are fairly nice. In London, I was in London for 2 weeks, and what I did in London is I sublet an apartment, which is you'll also probably, as we go through this interview, you'll find out that I am a very frugal traveler it's I hate to say cheap, but I try to go as frugal as possible. So to rent an apartment in London is a lot cheaper than renting a room. The rooms in London are very, very expensive. Like your basic little Holiday Inn usually rents for about $140 a night. But I rented an apartment for about $75 a night and then had cooking facilities and stuff. And then when we went into the Lake District, we also happened to have a timeshare condominium. And so we did a trade out and stayed for a week in the Lake District in a timeshare. So.
Those are wonderful tips for individuals that might be going to travel. And certainly there's agencies and all that you can get this information from. Very, very good advice. Our staff's been so kind as to take some of your slides or photographs, and they have recorded those. Annie, I'm going to ask them to put those up, and we're going to take some time on the program. And here's the first one. If you'll take us through some of these, our visitors can visually see where you were.
Okay, great. This one, since I was in London for a couple weeks, and since I also have been there quite a few times, the beginning slides are things that probably most tourists don't do in London. That first slide was Hampton Court, and it's advertised as where Henry VIII liked it so well. He spent 3 honeymoons there, and so it's really fascinating to go through the grounds there are absolutely beautiful, and so that was really pretty fun.
Here's our next slide.
This is a traditional slide. You know, it's like the telephone booths in London. Also, I'm a watercolorist, and so a lot of the slides I take for the idea that eventually I'm going to do a watercolor from them, and that was probably one of the simplest watercolors you can do. You know, but they still have all those phone booths. They're still very, very common. And you'll find them even driving through the countryside. You'll be out in the middle of nowhere, and there'll be a little red phone booth out there.
Yeah, so that's something you can use in your work. Here's the next one.
Okay, let's move on up. We've moved up now. This is the English coast. We were in London for a couple of weeks, and then we rented a car and headed up the English coast. And this is over by, let's see, right below Durham, and it's in the Yorkshire area.
It's a beautiful natural scene, and so you're doing both the urban areas and the rural areas.
Right. After you've been in, for those who've been in big cities, you know that after you've been in London, especially where there was like 6 million people in London, it's fun, the hubbub's fun and stuff, but boy, is it fun to get out of London, too. And that's it. And for some of the people that know their history a lot better than I do will know more about this. This is the Harrington Wall. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but that was the wall that they built because as rumor goes, they had 40,000 Roman troops and they didn't know what to do with them, so they built this wall. And so you can hike along that wall and stuff, and it's really pretty fun. And the history that goes with it, and you're trying to figure out what the wall was for, because it's only about 3 feet high, so you kind of wonder what the purpose was.
That's a good time to have a guide at that moment.
Yeah. Oh, here we go. Now we're into Scotland, and for the whiskey connoisseurs in the area, this is a distillery in Scotland. And for here in the United States, we might say go around and do wine tasting. In Scotland, you do around and you do Scotch tasting. So you go around to the
and in Germany, it's beer.
Yeah, you have a little bit of. They actually give you a little bit of whiskey before you go in, and then once I went through the tour, I never wanted to drink whiskey again because after they showed how it was made. But they also have rules on the distilleries there. This one has an interesting history to it. This is the bridge when England took over Scotland, and they didn't want the Scottish to wear their kilts into town anymore. So they would stop on that bridge, or there was really a tavern, and that's where they changed from their skirts into their trousers. And that's called, the tavern's called like tish to tosh, or whatever means skirts to pants. Now we're up in one of the bed and breakfasts we stayed in. This is about a 300-year-old hunting lodge that they converted to a bed and breakfast. And we had a delightful time there. This was also the day of the royal wedding. So here we're up in this really very nice lodge, a very nice home, and it's up in the hills. And then we had our dinner cooked by the woman who was there, who is also a graduate of Cordon Bleu, so in London.
Oh,
so
very special.
And now we're just on the English countryside, working our way back down here.
Beautiful country.
Lots of sheep. You could kind of
very
see
green, a lot of rain.
Very, very rainy. If you have a chance.
That's why they have such beautiful, lush green.
Yeah. We laughed. There's not probably one picture that we have ourselves that doesn't have our raincoats on. Yeah. That's what the Irish and the Scottish will say. Well, why do you think it's so green? And now we're into Ireland. This is the Irish, and this is the Dingle Peninsula. We biked along there. We were in England for about 3 weeks, I guess, and then we flew over to Ireland, and we joined a biking tour, and we biked along the Dingle Peninsula.
You get to see a lot of water too along the way.
This is also for the movie buffs in the audience. This is where they filmed Far and Away with Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. This right here, in fact, is when you'll be driving along and they'll kind of say, these little pictures, it'll say kind of like Tom Cruise slept here type thing.
So that's another view of the countryside.
Yeah, it is absolutely beautiful. Very beautiful. And the Irish people, very, very nice. Very
in traveling, I've always noticed that people are very friendly and very much alike in many parts of the world.
Yeah, I guess I've been. This is the Cliffs of Moher, where a lot of people have probably heard about it. Whatever it is, it's absolutely beautiful again. And
you can travel along that whole area there and see it from different angles, I assume.
Yeah, and from a bike, you see it pretty much up close and personal.
And I noticed that, again, here's another shot. Most of these are on somewhat of a cloudy day. Where's this at?
This is, again, I think this is one of our panoramic shots, and so it's back to looks like, again, either the English or the Irish coast. See, I should probably label that.
That's okay.
Yeah, one side or the other, we know.
Yeah,
but I guess it looks both Irish.
But it's very important on these trips. Here's another, I believe this is maybe...
Typical castle. This is a bandit castle. This is up on the area of where the Loch Ness Monster is supposed to be. We never saw him, but that's where he's supposed to be. I assume it's a he. I don't know why I assumed that.
We've done a show on that some time ago, but another Scottish traveler about whether it exists. And this shot?
I like this one. This is just a typical one of the English-Scottish countryside, and yet all those are little fences along there, and it's very typical to see all the little walk fences that they make.
In a farming area.
And to keep the sheep in, the particular sheep in, and they're branded, but we never could figure out the branding system. And they were back to the Cliffs of Moher again.
Yes, that's just a gorgeous shot. You and your husband both are photographers and take the pictures?
Well, for the people who are watching the show, I am the photographer. I take most of the pictures, and Ed claims he tells me where to stand.
Well, that's important. It's a team effort.
Yeah, it's a team effort. He always says, I think you should stand here and take the pictures, so that's why we...
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It adds so much to the program to have some visuals, and I can see why you enjoyed the trip, and we'll return to Janelle.
I want to ask you something that is dear to most travelers' hearts. What kind of clothing should you take along, and what do you recommend? You've been to Europe a number of times, and I suppose you have to travel a little light if you're going to be a bicycler. But what do you really recommend, and how do you suggest that people go about selecting what they're going to take along on a trip that's as long as a month?
Okay, since I do travel, and this particular biking trip was, they carried our bags for us, but in past years where I've carried my own, I get very picky about how lightweight clothes. The rule is that you pack, you look at your clothes, and you put half of them back in the closet, because you'd be surprised at how little you can get by on. I take a lot of things that you can wash out by hand, like silks. For this particular trip, I took jeans. I rarely take jeans on most trips, but it was a little bit colder. A good raincoat, and if we have time, we'll show the picture of it. A raincoat, anything that's like coordinated. But the other thing I do is I take a disposable wardrobe that I take, particularly T-shirts or maybe sweaters or jackets or whatever that I don't really care about. I'm a thrift shopper, so I will go and get things at garage sales, and then I leave them as I go. So say in Scotland, we needed some heavier things, and so I brought things, and then I just left them at the last place we were with. It's a note that said donate to charity and stuff. And so my rule is that, and my husband has the hardest time with this rule, if you buy a T-shirt, you have to leave a T-shirt.
So in other words, what you're actually saying is, don't be concerned about what you're taking. If you need to buy something, buy it. And then leave it there. In
fact, like I said, I'm a thrift shopper, and we just had a delightful time at the charity shops in Scotland and England. We just went through and found some wonderful buys and stuff, and so we just bought something and left something. Especially, I used to do a lot of running, and so I have lots of running T-shirts, and people like something from America, so a lot of times I'll just leave the shirt for them. My Bloomsday shirts have been at more places than most people.
I haven't thought of that tip before about when you buy something, you leave something behind. What a neat idea. In my trips to Europe, we find that most places you travel, you're on your own with your luggage and so forth. No one's helping. So I know on one trip, of our members took way too much and was constantly struggling with getting suitcase one place to the other one. So I really appreciate that advice.
On the sideline too, that that's why I said I keep lightening the load. I take paperback books, and especially when I bike, I read them and I tear out the pages as I go too. But I take paperback books and leave the books for the next person at the airport or wherever, and so just kind of like leave it for the next person. But this time too, my husband gave me a bad time that I kept lightening the load, and then I bought my book in collector. I collect bookends, and I brought a cast iron bookends, and so it was twice as heavy as anything I threw out.
Well, maybe you're not as good at that as I thought about keeping the load light when you discard something and buy something heavier. Yeah. But what great advice. Also share with us, Annie, on this particular trip, and you've had many others, but what were some of the things on the trip that impressed you most about the area, not only from the geographical viewpoint, but the life of the people?
And the Irish pubs, if you are a drinker or not a drinker, you're almost better off not being a drinker in an Irish pub. But if you go, the Irish pubs, it's a must. The Irish pubs were so much fun. We would go in there, and the music producers started about 8 o'clock. They would sing the traditional Irish songs, and people would sing along. There would be people in the pub, say, about maybe 7 years old, up to about 90 years old. And what I like about it, you don't see that in the States as much as that whole, generation. It's not, usually in America you say it's a 20 club or it's a 50 club or whatever. You don't see that. And just fun. Everybody sings along and has a great time.
But all different kinds of ages and backgrounds.
Yeah. It's just really a fun time. So, but like Rick Steve says, but leave your coat at home because they're very smoky. The Irish still smoke quite a bit, as do the English. And so
get on your coat and your clothes.
And then people they just love to talk. I mean, Tony would have a great time over there because they love talking politics. One hunting lodge that we stayed at, we had a chance. Our dinner was with an English couple that were probably in their 60s, and they were just really a fun couple to talk to. We had this dinner that started at 7:30 and ended at about 11 at night.
That's my kind of dinner.
Yeah, and it was like he talked about anything and everything. We would bring out Clinton and Monica to the right when we were there. Prince Edward and Sophie were getting married, and so that was a big thing. And they were so excited because the royalty was actually marrying for love this time, and they were just so excited. And this one bed and breakfast we stayed at, we were asking her about Sophie, and Sophie is a very impressive woman. She's a self-made millionaire, and so I said, "Was she royalty?" And the bed and breakfast owner said, "No, she's a commoner." So it's just really funny that the commoner made it into the royal family.
That's happened before, I
guess. Yeah.
Two other questions. One of them is that when you're talking about politics internationally, don't you find people in Europe very informed? They stay, of course, the countries are small and there's a lot of interrelationship between the countries in Europe, but also about politics in the United States, other places. Did you find them that way, that they're so informed what's going on internationally?
Yeah, they are. They knew. In fact, it's almost embarrassing sometimes that they know more sometimes about what's going on in our country than I would going over there and stuff. And they're very, very well informed. The only probably even a little bit of negative thing that happened to me on the trip was I was sitting in a little coffee shop in London, and this woman asked to sit down with me and her daughters, and she had a foreign accent, so I asked where she was from, and she was from Yugoslavia. And when she found out I was American, boy, I just blasted for being American and stuff, and how she hated all Americans, and we didn't know what was going on, and we have this playboy president, and we got too many things that are happening in our own country. Why don't we just stay there and stuff? So, yeah, so that was.
But you will face that from time to time. But most people are very congenial.
Yeah.
One final question before we go back to Janelle, and that is that when Americans travel, they do it very differently, as you indicated. And some Americans go into the major urban centers and stay at, really American hotel and have dinner in the hotel, and they don't really taste the culture. What advice would you give people? How can people, if they're traveling for the first time abroad, how best can they get to know the country and its people rather than being isolated, for example, in an American hotel or visiting museums mostly? Although that's certainly a part of the process.
Yeah, you see too, and I think my first trip to Europe was called A Taste of Europe, and it was mostly big cities, and which is sometimes nice, especially when you're going over there and you're not too sure. But this time, the last 2 times we've rented cars to go over there, and people usually say, "Oh, that must be so expensive," and it's not. If you rent it, you always rent the car before you go over there, and it's relatively inexpensive. I think we paid $280 for 3 weeks, which is much cheaper
reasonable.
in the States. The shock is when you get to the gas station, and you pay $4 a gallon for. At first, when you see the car, it's about as big as half this table, and you first you think, "Oh my gosh, what a tiny little car," and then when you fill it up, you think, "Thank goodness for the tiny little car." So I would suggest, first of all, is to rent the car, because you get to different places that you normally wouldn't. We went to when we were up in Scotland, and we were going to go to the Isle of Skye, and instead we had just picked up this little flyer from Plockton, and I said, "Let's go to Plockton instead." And it was a very very little tiny town that to get into it was a one-lane street, or one-lane road for about 10 miles, that if another car came, they had little pullouts and stuff. They literally had the cows, they put the cows through the town at night to put the cows to sleep or whatever. And probably if you were on a train, you would never have gotten to that. So that's kind of more adventurous. Sometimes, too, the smaller tours are my husband's first trip to Europe with me. We went on a smaller tour in Italy, and there's only 7 of us. And sometimes those will get you into the out-of-the-way places. I'm not a big fan of the bus tours. But
That's good advice. Janelle Burke.
Your tip was very interesting with regard to packing. So I'm going to ask you now about food. When you're in other countries, what are some of your rules of thumb as far as food? I suppose what you're going to tell me is you should try everything.
Yeah, to a point. And then I used to say that we always laugh at the black pudding that's over there. My husband will try everything, and the black pudding, somebody convinced him to try the black pudding, and he thought, "Why do they eat this?" So I go to, especially in England, the pubs are probably one of the most inexpensive places to eat. And this time I found the English food and the Irish and the Scottish food just absolutely wonderful. Sometimes it used to be rather bland, but the seafood is relatively inexpensive. When we're actually traveling during the day, we usually pack a lunch. We usually just stop and get some meats and some bread and things like that, and try them along the way in the little places and the little delis.
So you can stop at grocery stores and do your own buying quite easily.
And they're a little bit different than here. You'll see more of it, like you'll go to the butcher and get your salami or whatever, and then you might go to the bakery and get your bread, and then you might go something. They don't have the huge grocery stores that we do here. They did have a Safeway, though. Right where I was in London, they had a Safeway right down the street. Very good delis. The delis are very good.
And do you suggest also eating out in some of the littler restaurants or places? How do you find the places you're going to stop at? Do you ask around when you're staying?
Especially when you're out in the littler places, you usually ask the bed and breakfast owner. They're usually pretty good about saying, I'd eat there or I wouldn't eat there type thing. And they have the menus listed on the doors, and so you can walk around and check things. And then, of course, most places you go, you're not the only tourist there, so you ask other tourists, where did you eat? Did you like it? Did you not like it?
Since you've had 10 trips to Europe already, and this one, the program was emphasizing the British Isles, but I would like for you to take this particular trip and compare it with some others, some comparison, contrast between other places you've been in Europe. What are the advantages of different places, or what is exciting, or what would you prefer over something else?
I think each trip has its own flair and its own fun. The England, I have to admit, is expensive to travel there. The dollar is not real strong, and things are just expensive there. Even the little bed and breakfasts were still usually about $50 a night. Now, on the other hand, when we were in Italy last year, you could get bed and breakfast for closer to maybe $35 a night. In fact, we stayed right on a lake for about 3 days at this really nice little bed and breakfast. It was like about $30, $35 a night. So it's a little bit more inexpensive. The other advantage, like we talked about before, the advantage of England, of course, is the language. You don't have the language barrier. It's about the only thing I can say in another language is to ask them if they speak English, and so that's about the extent of my bilingual. And the other? The weather Like somebody, my landlord in England said, you don't come to London for the weather, and that's for sure. It's cold, it's rainy, but you just kind of get used to it, I guess. I think that the Seattle person wouldn't have any problem over there at all, probably. But you just get used to it, and it doesn't stop you. I mean, we're avid hikers, and so you go out hiking if it's raining or if it's sunshine. It's just other things. Like I said, the food was much better this time. In past years, it's like the food hasn't been that good. But.
When you go also to some parts of Europe, and you go in the northern part, in the Scandinavian countries and all in particular, one thing that people who haven't traveled will be interested in is about the rotation and light and so forth. In other words, there are some parts of the summer in which you only have dark for about 3 hours, from say midnight to 3 in the morning.
Oh.
You might share that as something one prepare for. If one can't sleep well and when it's light, then that might be something you consider in your housing.
Oh, and the other countries. Now, I have not had the advantage of being up there into Norway and Sweden. What we've found the opposite is that it's light a lot longer. Mm-hmm. That it's nothing to have the sun come up at 5 o'clock in the morning and not be dark until about 10 o'clock at night. And so that's a different. But the jet lag thing is, I think that a lot of people are always concerned about jet lag. And like you said, it's easy to get into London. It's not that difficult of a flight. You get into London and it's about, I don't know, it probably takes about 12 hours or whatever. I drink tons of water on the plane. I'm very avid. And also, since I'm an avid exerciser anyway, it's just like get out and get walking and get that sunshine almost immediately.
Is there anything else that you can do to avoid jet lag? Because that's really something that can last 3 or 4 days, and it'll hit you a certain time of day, and it's very hard to function.
Right. I don't think it's as bad going to Europe or coming back. Going over, of course, you're very excited, and so it's like that right there helps you because you go and you want to see things and get moving and stuff, and if you get right back on schedule, you're usually pretty good. And coming back, I just adjust my sleeping habits very quickly by just taking the aspirin PMs that just kept me take up with those.
On that note, I have to bring our program to conclusion. On behalf of Janelle Burke and our staff, Annie McKinley, thank you so much for being here. You're a wonderful guest. I feel like I've been on the trip with you in some ways, and we appreciate, we know our viewers enjoyed your visuals that you brought and some great advice that you gave for those who are going to travel in the future. And good luck next summer when you go. I know you're planning on going back to Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, it's always a pleasure to bring you a program dealing with travel in different parts of the world. In this case, we've been traveling to the British Isles with Annie McKinley in 1999 as she did her summer trip. I would like to invite you to be with us again next week at this same time when we'll move to yet another issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
North Idaho College Public Forum is the longest-running public television show of its type in North America and is seen in 7 states and 2 Canadian provinces. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational community outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us again at this same time next week for another new edition of North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.